right, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks to my fellow panelists. Look, a lot of points have been made here, and I can't possibly respond to all of them point by point. And there's lots of ways to slice and dice numbers and arguments. But let me try and talk about how we see this issue and what we're trying to do about it. And as Katie said, I think what we can all agree, and we certainly share the same goal, is that we want to help do everything we can as the bank to help all children be able to go to school and get a quality education. And that's the thrust of our Learning for All strategy, which we launched last year. So we all agree on that. And as also was mentioned several times, the bank is the largest external financer in developing countries for education. Since 2000, and you have a little book at the back here if you haven't had a chance to see it, and as well as a little issue brief, please pick it up. This is a bit of a handy guide to, well, this looks actually in detail at what we've done this past year, but then there's an issue brief in the back on overall on the bank's work on education. But I just think a couple, the number is quite staggering, $29 billion that the bank has provided for education since 2000. About 2/3 of that, and that's been pretty steady, about 2/3 of that has gone towards basic education. So that's a pretty significant contribution that we've made. And as Katie said, that's in the context of other donor support, frankly, not accelerating. So what happened in 2002? Just to respond a little bit on the issue of the pledge, and then I'd like to address some of the points that Katie raised. You know, we're not satisfied with the progress. The fact that there's more than 60 million children out of school, that's an issue that we are deeply concerned about. So going into the 2010 MDG Summit, we took a look at what could the bank reasonably propose to do that would help to accelerate progress towards the MDG goals by 2015. And we looked at GPE's own assessment of where the demand was in countries and what they were projecting in light of their anticipating their own replenishment. And we looked at where the financing, where our own financing had been over the past decade prior, from 2000, the year that the MDGs were announced. And that baseline is 742 million, which is the average annual baseline for that decade prior. It's actually 11 years, but we thought it made sense to look at the launch. A sensible starting point was FY 2000, which was September 2000, which was when the MDGs were launched. So looking at that, we came to the conclusion that what we could propose as a pledge at the MDG Summit, that was something we thought we could attain, but that would represent an increase, was an additional 750 million over that previous baseline that I mentioned of 742 million. So 750 million additional over 5 years. So in the period from FY11, which we were in at that time in September 2000, the bank's fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30, so it's not exactly matching the calendar year. So from FY11, fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 15, running up to the MDG deadline, that we would pledge over those 5 years an additional 750 million over that baseline. And if you go to the original statement of the pledge, that is the pledge. It always has been the pledge, that is the pledge, an additional 750 million over the baseline. And as Tony mentioned, our new World Bank, that was made by our previous World Bank president, although it was not just a presidential commitment, let me stress that, it's a bank commitment. But our new president, Jim Kim, who started a couple of months ago, did reaffirm that pledge, and that we would meet that pledge. He reaffirmed that very recently at the UN Summit. So we stand by it. So what's happened since? Well, in the first year of the pledge, we did not make progress, and we've acknowledged that. In fiscal year 11, which had already started by the time we made the pledge, basic education, IDA basic education support dropped. And that's not something we're proud of, but that's what happened. And what I'll speak to in a minute, you have to understand how IDA works, in large part to understand that. it's very normal for our funding levels, our lending levels to fluctuate from year to year. The good news is that in this past fiscal year, we've more than made up for that. So in fiscal year 12, which concluded at the end of June 30th of this year, and as was noted, we had a record year of IDA support to basic education of $1.5 billion, and that exceeds any of the previous years, including the two recent years, fiscal year 9 and 10, which were extraordinary years of support for IDA to education, because those were the years that lending spiked in response to the global financial crisis. And again, that's very normal that we would see that kind of fluctuation. Why? Because what the countries do is they want to protect their existing expenditures for social services. And so that's what that largely went to do. In some cases also, there was some support that was moved up, that was fast-tracked to get it to the countries sooner. So that was also why you saw that inevitable dip in fiscal year 11. And we're projecting that for the current fiscal year that we're in now, which is fiscal year 13, which will end next June 30th, we're projecting another strong year, probably not quite as high as this year, as 1.5, but at the moment, we're projecting about 1.2 billion. It could be higher, it could be lower. We really don't know at this stage. It all depends, but that's our best assessment as of today based on what's in the pipeline. And that means projects that are being prepared right now and are slated to go to our board for approval within this fiscal year. If something happens in a country, if there's a crisis, if there's a coup, if there's a corruption scandal, if for whatever reason the project is not ready, the determination is it's not ready, the proper assessments haven't done, that might change. So we really won't know until next July. And that may be hard for some people who don't follow this closely to understand, but that is the way our model financing works. So we're giving it our best projection as of right now. We're reasonably confident that we will hit that mark, but we don't know for sure. If we do meet that projection, and you can see this on our website, we have a tracking pledge. We will actually, in fact, fulfill that $750 million additional pledge at the end of this fiscal year. However, in fact, we'll go beyond it. We'll actually be up an additional $257 million. However, and we take Results' point on this very much to heart, we can't say that we're finished with that, and we're not going to say that we're finished with that until the end of the 5-year period through 2015, because it was a pledge over 5 years. So we need to hold ourselves accountable that we maintain that aggregate cumulative increase through the 5-year period. So we will continue to monitor that, and one thing we've done since talking to Results a couple weeks ago is we've actually, if you take a look at our website, we've changed the way it's portrayed on the website. So we're not tracking 0% to pledge, we take that on board, and we are just showing the cumulative increase, and we'll continue to monitor that, and we will provide quarterly updates through the rest of this pledge period through 2015. So you can hold us accountable, and I fully expect you will do so. So as I said, again, it's really important to understand how IDA works. It's not like other donors. It's not like bilateral donors where a grant is given and it's a very different type of model. It really is demand-driven by the countries. The countries set the priorities for IDA financing. And as I said, it's very normal for lending to go like this, which is why we never take 1 year at any given time. It's normal to stretch it out over a period of years. And we did have exceptional funding in the last few years, so it made sense to take a longer baseline. The countries set the priorities for financing. We do that, the IDA is given in 3-year tranches. There are 3-year IDA replenishments, and there are also 3-year periods for what we call our country assistance strategies or country partnership strategies. So that's when we sit down with the country, we talk about their priorities for financing, and to the point that we can come back to, there's a broad civil society engagement and public stakeholder engagement in that process. How exactly that works varies country to country, but it's a requirement of ours that we have a consultative process in place in setting those priorities. So it's not just done in smoky backfield rooms between us and the finance ministry. And so there is a public accountability process for setting those priorities. And then and then they let us know what they want to use their IDA envelope, if you will, their IDA amount of allocation, what they would like to use that for. If the demand for the countries is there for basic education, and we hope that it will be, we will not only fill our pledge, but we fully expect we'll go beyond it. But we're not going to project out to 2015. It would not be prudent for us to do so. Also, that actually goes into another IDA replenishment cycle, so we don't know exactly how much money we'll be working with. But we're confident that we will meet our pledge and most likely go beyond that. The key is getting education, and particularly basic education, as a priority, not just for ministers of education, but for ministers of finance. And that's why I'm glad you're all here and talking about this issue, and I really hope that I think my colleagues hope you're taking full advantage of it to raise this issue with finance ministers. We are doing so. My colleague Ritva Reinica, who would have been here, is, as we speak, sitting in a series of bilateral meetings with country delegations. And this is one of the issues we're going to raise for the countries where it's an issue. So we are doing our part to raise this as an issue, to see what we can do with the countries, to see how this figures into their priorities and to make that case. I think it's also important to realize that, governments, basic education, so we talked about the issue that, of course, they want to use IDA financing for a range of things, for multiple sectors, and that is very true. And that's in large part because they are getting sources of funding from elsewhere. But it's also because they also have a strong and growing demand, rightly so, for secondary education and for higher education. That's largely because access to basic education has grown so rapidly over the past decade. So that's a good story. And because there are more donors in the space for basic education, the bank is one of the few donors that will provide support at this higher levels of education. So it's not unexpected that they would turn to us for that kind of support, and because they value our support and our technical assistance in that area. So that's a very strong case for why, and we're going to be responsive to that. And let's also remember that investments in higher education also turn around into investments in primary education. We're talking about teacher training and other things. And so we're focused on the investments across the whole education system. Yes, primary education, basic education is the foundation, is extremely important, and we've made it very clear that we stand firmly behind that. But we're looking at the whole system and how to make the whole system work better, to include, as I'm really glad Katie focused on, the learning issue, the quality of learning. So not just that the kids are sitting in school, but they're actually learning something, that they're going to graduate, and they're going to graduate with the skills and knowledge they need to improve their lives and to get good jobs and provide for their families and improve their stake in life and realize their dreams. That's what we all want. So we really are focused on access and on quality. Just a few more points. It was acknowledged that the bank is the supervising entity for nearly 90% of the Global Partnership for Education projects. I think that's a really important point, and frankly not one that we don't get credit for, but it's a really important role that we play. We have actually been trying to encourage other donors to step up to the plate and play that role, and there's been a reluctance to do it. And it's also been because donor partners have specifically requested, and in some cases countries, governments have specifically requested our support to do that because they value the role that we play. So that's a major institutional investment over and beyond what IDA does, our support for GP in terms of what we're doing for basic education. As was also said, and this goes in response to some of the, just to quickly respond before I close to some of the points, the recommendations Katie was talking about. So in terms of, so let me just address those in point. So what can the World Bank do? The one mention was about automatic co-financing of IDA. It's not the way IDA works. So it was never set up to have this automatic trigger. We wish that it would, but it was never set up to do that. So that's something that there have been just discussions on, but it's not something the bank it's not something we're going to decide unilaterally. There's actually a conversation with all of the GPE donors and with the countries. So, but at the moment, that's not really something that we can do. But in terms of pursuing GP cofinancing, which is true. We did reference that in our pledge, not that that was part of our pledge, but we said our intent was to look at opportunities for ways in which we could leverage other financing with the Global Partnership for Education, and we're doing that. So as was mentioned, there's a number of countries where we've already done co-financing or pooling such of funds in a number of countries in Africa and South Asia, Nepal, Ethiopia, Malawi, Mozambique. We're currently, I understand, looking at how to do this in DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which we hope will come to fruition. So yes, we agree that's a goal. It's not something we can make happen in an automatic way, but it's a discussion we have country by country with the ministers of finance and with partners. Secondly, about outreach to our country directors to make the case for basic education. Again, we're doing this. We're not only directly going to the ministers of finance and our counterparts, but yes, we've had over the last year, and particularly in the last few months, we have a new Vice President for Africa, and we've had a discussion with him, and country by country looking at where might be the opportunities to leverage more IDA support. In some countries, the IDA envelope is actually very small, so we don't have a lot of flexibility. In other countries, particularly looking at the larger countries where there's more after-school children, we're trying to see where we can do more. Encouraging civil society engagement in decision-making and national priorities, absolutely, we agree. And again, as I responded, that's the whole basis for how the country assistance strategies are developed. So we agree and happy to entertain specific ideas in countries or where we can do more to make that happen. And finally, and this goes back to the other point on GPE, so on independence of Global Partnership for Education GPE from the World Bank. We talked about the fact that the bank is actually the implementer of about nearly 90% of GPE projects. Katie said their view is that bank support to GPE has not always been beneficial. I would just say ask the countries and the donors that question, because the evidence is to the contrary, because again, they continue to seek out our role as implementer and supervising entity, both countries and donors. But we're happy to step back if others want to step up to the plate, but increasingly we are being asked to do that, and that has not changed. Finally, on our position on independence from the Global Partnership from Education, we've been very, very clear on this. Look, we launched, the bank was instrumental in launching the Global Partnership. It used to be called the Fast Track Initiative in 2002 under then World Bank President Jim Wolfenson. I was with him in Dakar when he first announced the idea for what became the Fast Track Initiative. Very committed to that over a series of years. Some of you may recall we had repeated press conferences with donors and countries to really make this a top-line issue. We hosted the Secretariat, provided a lot of both direct support to the Secretariat and in-kind support. GP relies on bank systems, HR policies, all of these things, which are not insignificant contributions. But we've been very clear that as the partnership has matured, and if the sense of the GPE board, of which we are just one member, is that the Global Partnership for Education should move and be hosted elsewhere, then we were ready and prepared to support that transition. As up until now, the board has not made that decision or wished to move in that direction. They've been reviewing that, so that will continue to be an issue that I'm sure all the partners in GPE will look at. But we've been very clear that's a decision for the GP board. It's not a decision for the bank, and we will stand by whatever decision is made. So let me stop there, and happy to respond to other points.